You probably know the rhyme. It has the cadence of the jump rope chants we used to do on the playground when I was a girl. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. The rhyme itself was wrong in most every detail. So Abby was not Lizzie Borden's mother. She was her stepmother, and she received 18 blows, not 40. Her father, Andrew, received 10, not 41. And Lizzie Borden was acquitted by a jury of her peers in just over an hour on June 20th, 1893. The jury said, not guilty. Fall River, Massachusetts, however, said something much different. And Lizzie Borden lived with that verdict in Fall River, in the same city where it all happened, for 34 years after the acquittal. She never gave a single interview. She never made a statement. She never offered one word of explanation. Just 34 years of silence in a city that never forgave her. But this is not Lizzie Borden's story. This is Emma Borden's story. Emma Lenora Borden was Lizzie's older sister by 9 years. Emma was not at the house on August 4th, 1892, when it all went down. And Emma testified at Lizzie's trial, and she never wavered in her sister's defense. She then lived with Lizzie for 13 years in a house that they called Maplecroft. And then one day, Emma packed her bags, and she never spoke to her sister again. What Emma Borden knew is the story nobody has fully told. Emma and Lizzie's mother, Sarah, died in 1863. Emma was 12 years old and Lizzie was 2. And Emma, standing at her mother's deathbed, promised her mother that she would take care of her baby sister. Now, let's think about that for a moment. A 12-year-old child making a deathbed promise to a dying woman about a 2-year-old who would probably never remember her mother's face. Emma was practically a child herself, and she took that promise on like it was the most natural thing in the world, which really at that time would have been a normal thing. We had high rates of maternal mortality for a variety of reasons, and it fell to the other family members to step in and fill the gap if a mother was lost. And that promise that Emma made at her mother's deathbed was the spine of her entire life. Throughout their difficult childhood with a stepmother that neither sister accepted, a father who used his considerable fortune as a weapon, changing his will at a whim to enforce compliance, through old resentments and new tensions that built slowly and steadily in a house on 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, for 30 years before that date, August 4th, 1892. And Emma kept her promise through all of it until it came to a point where she couldn't anymore. Andrew Jackson Borden was one of the wealthiest men in Fall River and one of the most famously frugal, or as my mother would say, frugal spelled Cheap. And he was known to be, in certain respects, a genuinely difficult man to live with. His house on 2nd Street had no indoor plumbing in a city where indoor plumbing was entirely standard for men of his level of wealth. And he lived in a less fashionable neighborhood than his fortune could have afforded, not the Hill, where the truly prominent families lived. He used his will as a weapon, the way powerful men did when there was nothing to stop them. He rewarded compliance and he punished independence with threats to withhold money. If you have watched the Telltale Heart video on this channel, this will feel like a very familiar story. I want to sit with the plumbing for just one more second. He was one of the wealthiest men in Fall River, and he had no indoor plumbing. This was not poverty. This was a choice Andrew Borden made about how his household would live. His daughters, who were 32 and 41 years old and still living under his roof in a house with no indoor plumbing in a city where that was remarkable. Just keep that in mind. After Emma and Lizzie's mother, Sarah, died, Andrew married again in 1865 to a woman named Abby Durfee Gray. Emma was 14 when Abby arrived. She never accepted her. She felt and made it clear that she felt that Abby had married her father for his money. And Emma's attitude shaped Lizzie's from the beginning. Both sisters called her Mrs. Borden. They rarely ate meals with her and Andrew. A household full of old resentments building on new ones. Two sisters bound together by a deathbed promise, waiting for something none of them could name. On a brutally hot Thursday in August of 1892, Emma was in Fairhaven, 15 miles from Fall River, visiting friends. She had an unimpeachable alibi, so she was never a suspect. At the house on 2nd Street, Abby Borden was killed first, struck from behind in the upstairs guest bedroom. 18 blows, dead between 60 and 90 minutes before Andrew was killed. Andrew was found napping on the sitting room couch. 10 blows. The only people known to be in the house that morning were Lizzie, Andrew, Abby, and Bridget Sullivan, the Borden's 25-year-old Irish maid. She said that she had been outside cleaning windows and then, feeling unwell, had gone to rest in her room. Emma received a telegram and rushed home to the worst day of both the sisters' lives, to a house where the most vicious crime had just happened, and nothing had been explained. Emma rushed home to the sister she had promised her dying mother to protect, and she stood by her, the way she always had. Before we go further, there is someone else who was in that house on August 4th whose story deserves a moment. Bridget Sullivan was 25 years old. She was an Irish immigrant who had come to America, like many of our ancestors did, looking for a better life. And she found herself working for one of the most famously difficult households in Fall River. The Borden sisters called her Maggie, the name of a previous maid, rather than learning her actual name. It's a small detail, but it tells you quite a bit about the family. Now, Bridget testified carefully at the inquest and the trial. She provided key information that never directly incriminated Lizzie. And after the acquittal, she left Fall River, and eventually she settled in Butte, Montana, where she married and lived a quiet life, dying in 1948, more than 20 years after both of the Borden sisters had died. Whatever Bridget Sullivan knew, she took it to Butte, Montana, and she kept it until she died. She was the third woman in this story who kept her silence to the end. Now, Lizzie was arrested 11 days after the murders. She was tried before an all-male jury the following year in what newspapers called, of course, the trial of the century. The evidence was circumstantial. Lizzie had burned a dress 3 days after the murders. She said it was paint-stained. Her inquest testimony had inconsistencies. A hatchet head was found in the basement that could have been the murder weapon, but couldn't be definitively proven to be. And through it all, Emma was there, testifying to her sister's good character, her peaceful nature, her devotion to family. The jury acquitted Lizzie in just over an hour, and Emma stood by her because she had promised their mother that she would. 20 days after the acquittal, the sisters purchased a 14-room Queen Anne house on the Hill, the fashionable neighborhood their father had always refused to live in. They named it Maplecroft and had the name etched right into the front steps. It had modern plumbing, it had a telephone, they had live-in maids and a housekeeper and a coachman. Everything the 2nd Street house had denied them. But Fall River didn't care. School children threw things at the house and regularly pranked and taunted them. Lizzie Borden took an axe. The neighbors watched from behind their lace curtains. The church community that Lizzie had served for years, Sunday school, the Christian Endeavor Society, the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission, abandoned her entirely. Former friends were simply gone. Newspapers wrote thinly veiled accusations, all but saying that she had gotten away with murder. Lizzie began feeding birds and squirrels in the seclusion of her backyard. She left the house only by carriage. In 1897, she was accused, but not charged, of shoplifting two paintings from a store in Providence. The matter was privately resolved, but it was another stone thrown. Two sisters living in a gilded cage, bound together by a deathbed promise, with nowhere else to go. And Fall River was never going to forget. So for 13 years, Emma and Lizzie lived together at Maplecroft. 13 years while Fall River refused to move on, and the rime spread further, and Lizzie fed birds in the backyard. And meanwhile, cracks formed that nobody outside could see. Lizzie hired a handsome French-Canadian coachman named Joseph Tetrell. Emma reportedly disapproved of the familiarity between them. The neighbors on the hill were already talking. Then in 1904, Lizzie met a young actress named Nance O'Neill. For 2 years, they were inseparable. Lizzie supported her financially in ways that went considerably beyond ordinary friendship. She hosted lavish parties at Maplecroft for Nance and her theatrical company. Theater people filling the house, strong drink involved, lively evenings that echoed through the windows of the most watched house on the hill in Fall River. Emma, who had kept the promise through everything, was horrified. She reportedly consulted the family's minister, Reverend Buck. Whatever it was he told her, the decision she made was final. In June of 1905, Emma Borden packed her bags and left Maplecroft, and she never came back. She told a Boston newspaper later what she could bring herself to say and no more. She said, "The happenings at the French Street house that caused me to leave, I must refuse to talk about. I did not go until conditions became absolutely unbearable." That was all. She would not say more, not then, not in 1913 when a reporter tracked her down for the only interview she ever gave after the break. Not ever. The woman who had made the deathbed promise, who had testified at the trial of the century, she refused to say what had happened in her own house, even to clear her own name, even to explain herself. In that interview that she gave, she said Lizzie was queer. In the meaning of the day, she was saying that Lizzie was odd. She said conditions had been unbearable, and she said, "Queer? Yes, Lizzie is queer, but as for her being guilty, I say no, and decidedly no." She defended her sister's innocence to the end, at the same time refusing to live with her, refusing to explain why, refusing to speak to her for 22 years. That combination, the absolute defense, the absolute silence, the absolute departure, is the mystery at the center of Emma Borden's story. She believed in Lizzie's innocence, and she couldn't stand to be in the same house with her. Those two things sit together and refuse to resolve. And I find myself, every time I think about it, just turning it over and over. Emma left Maplecroft and didn't look back. She stayed briefly with Reverend Buck's family, then moved to Fairhaven, then to Providence, Rhode Island, then to Newmarket, New Hampshire, where she lived under an assumed name in a house she had purchased for herself and two women named Mary and Annie Connor, virtually anonymous. The woman who had promised her dying mother to protect her baby sister, living quietly under a false name in a small New Hampshire town because conditions had become absolutely unbearable and she had run out of ways to make them bearable. She never returned to Fall River while Lizzie was alive, and she never contacted her sister. She never explained. Lizzie died on June 1st of 1927 in Fall River from complications following gallbladder surgery. She was 66 years old. She had not spoken publicly about the murders in 34 years. Close friends knew that she had a theory about who had actually killed Andrew and Abby Borden. She took it to her grave. Her will left nothing to Emma. She wrote, "She has enough to make her comfortable." She left $500 for perpetual care of her father's burial lot. She left nothing for the care of her stepmother Abby's grave. And she left the bulk of her considerable estate to animal welfare organizations. Emma has enough to make her comfortable. Cold words for 50 years of keeping the promise. Emma Borden died 9 days later, on June 10th in 1927. She fell down the back stairs of her house in Newmarket, New Hampshire. She'd been estranged from her sister for 22 years when Lizzie had died, and she followed 9 days later as if the promise she had made in 1863 to a dying woman about a 2-year-old child still held some last claim on her, even at the very end. They were buried together at the family plot at Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River. Lizzie, Emma, their mother Sarah, their stepmother Abby, and Andrew, who was buried without his skull, which had been removed during the autopsy and never returned to his body. Creepy, I know. But it sort of feels right for this particular story. The whole Borden family, together at last, after everything, minus Andrew's skull. The promise that Emma had made to a dying woman in 1863 was finally done. Now, we will never know what Emma Borden knew. The happenings at Maplecroft that made conditions absolutely unbearable are as lost to history as Lizzie's theory about who actually killed Andrew and Abby Borden. As lost as whatever Bridget Sullivan, aka Maggie, saw on the morning of August 4th, 1892, and chose not to fully say. 3 women, 3 silences, 3 secrets carried to 3 different graves, 2 in Fall River and 1 in Butte, Montana. But here's what we do know. Emma Borden was 12 years old when she made that promise. She had no business being asked to carry such a thing, and she carried it anyway. Through a miserable childhood, a difficult household, and the worst crime Fall River had ever seen, and the trial of the century, and 13 years in a gilded cage while the city threw things at the house, and the rhyme spread everywhere. She testified at the trial. She never wavered. She lived with Lizzie when nobody else in Fall River would, and then she couldn't keep it anymore. The happenings at Maplecroft that caused Emma Borden to leave were bad enough to break a promise made to a dying mother by a 12-year-old child, and that promise held for 50 years. Think about that for just a moment. We will never know the secrets those 3 women took to their grave, but we continue to be fascinated by the story. That house where the murders happened is now a bed and breakfast for those who dare to stay under its roof. And I'm told people dare quite regularly. I'll see you again somewhere in time.